And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the 2024 Black Friday edition of the Africa Impact Matters series podcast. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Well, in just a moment, we'll speak to the Minister for Electricity and Energy, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, about why he decided to suspend Mete from NERSA. We'll speak to him in just a moment. Look at inflation, of course, today coming in at 2.8%. And then, did you ever get the increase that you wanted, and how did you do it? Really like to hear from you tonight on that on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, a series of comments today by the Minister of Electricity and Energy, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, suggesting the integrated resource plan that will determine how we produce electricity is being remodeled. At the same time, long queues in parts of Soweto today because prepaid meters need to have their software reconfigured ahead of a technical deadline on Sunday. If the software is not updated, they won't work. They'll have to be replaced. Meanwhile, you may remember on Monday, as the energy regulator NERSA started its process to consider Eskom's 36% tariff increase, the minister suspended its full-time member for electricity in Mete. Mete had said 3 months ago he believed NERSA was using the wrong methodology to determine electricity prices. Well, the electricity minister, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, his office said that he would speak to us this week. He's actually come out of a meeting to do so, so I do appreciate that. Minister, good evening, and thank you for interrupting your meeting to speak to us. Why have you suspended Mete from his position at NERSA?
Oh, good evening, Stephen, and good evening to the listeners. So first is that is a labor relations issue. But perhaps, and I think it will be unfair for me to ventilate what the issues are because Mr. Mete reserves the right of reply. But just on a process point of view is that the board of NERSA wrote to me and suggested that on their version there's prima facie evidence to suggest that Mr. Mete is bringing the organization into disrepute, and they substantiated what the issues were. And I gave Mr. Mete the right of reply, and he came back to me with a long explanation on why he thinks he hasn't brought the organization into disrepute, and in fact his conduct was consistent with the mandate of the regulator. So essentially, I was sitting with two opposing versions of what had transpired, and of course I went to my legal team internally to advise on how best to mediate or resolve the matter, and the advice was that look, just initiate an independent process so that they can arrive at a determination, and in the course of that I think it will be in the best interest of the organization that we ask Mr. Mete to step aside, and that's what we have done, communicated to him, and the process will then unfold without necessarily pronouncing on what the outcomes of that process will be.
Sure.
And in the meantime, appointed an interim electricity regulator whose substantive appointment is she's responsible for gas, and is the one who's working with the board to conduct the current public hearings.
Okay. He made comments about pricing methodology 3 months ago. He's been suspended because of that, right?
No, let's not go there. So I'm not about to do that. Mr. Mete reserves the right of reply. So I will not, on public platform, just go after Mr. Mete. I think it's not correct. I think it's extremely unfair on him. Let's allow the process to transpire, and then I'll share with the rest of the country what the outcome of that process is.
So, Minister, I mean, you can say that, and I sort of accept some of that, but the fact is that you're a minister, you took the action to suspend a member of an independent regulator at the start of a pricing application. I mean, you did it on Monday as the pricing application started. I have to say, it seems to me one is linked to the other.
No, it's not correct. I just explained to you the chronology of events, how it unfolded, one.
But you haven't explained what he actually did wrong. I mean, that's the point.
And I'm not about to do that for a reason that I've explained to you. And in the process of conducting the public hearings is a process of the board of NERSA. It's not a process of one individual.
there'll be an inquiry now. That's how it works, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that inquiry, the result of it will eventually have to be made public.
Yes, and that's the point. That's the commitment I'm making. I just said to you, allow the process to unfold. Once the findings are made, I'll make it public. That has been the nature of my relationship with the South Africans, and I'm not about to deviate from that. So it will be made public.
So I don't get what is lost by you telling us now. I mean, he's welcome to phone in on 011 8830702 and give his version. I mean, so you're saying that this is a labor relations issue and you can't say anything because of his rights. But he's the person who's been suspended by you at the start of a really important process. So the inference...
Absolutely.
The inference, Minister, and let me put it plainly so that you can respond to it, because I think that would be best. But the inference is that you may have suspended him to influence the outcome of the process, that you didn't want him to be involved in this pricing application by Eskom. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that's the question.
No, that's a wild accusation. The point I'm making is that there's a series of events that culminated into this. The decision of what that tariff is a determination of the collective of the board of NERSA. And that's a transparent process, and they'll be able to explain it publicly. And Mr. Gumede reserves the right of reply, and there's a process that you've set in motion. I'm not about to conduct an inquiry on the public domain. Extremely unfair to Mr. Gumede. So he'll be given that opportunity to articulate his version, and on the basis of that, arrive at a determination. And I'll communicate to the country what the outcomes are.
Okay, I mean, if he waives that right, if he gets in touch with us and says, look, I want the world to know what's going on, you'd be happy with that?
No, that's fine. That's his right. But I'm going to ensure that I protect the integrity of the process. I'm not about to conduct that process in the public domain. So if he calls after this to articulate his version, that's his right. He chooses that to go that route, but he'll still be given an opportunity through an established process to substantiate, and then a determination will be made by an independent inquiry, and the minister will then communicate to the rest of the country. But I think that's how it's going to unfold.
Sure, but the process of determining Eskom's application will be finished by then.
But that's not a single regulator's responsibility. That's the point I'm making. That is a collective of NERSA that makes that determination. And I think your suggestion is that it resides with just one regulator. I'm making the point that it's part of a collective. And that's why there's reference to a board of NERSA. And then there's a permanent regulator responsible for electricity. And those views get to be subjected to the collective of the board. And then it is the board that makes that determination.
I'm sorry to be so cynical, Minister, but I've seen it happen before. Not with you, let me be very clear, and not even in your department. But we've seen it happen before, where just before a very important process, because a single vote can decide things either way, people are removed.
Yes, but I just explained to you what is unfolding before us. And the nice thing about the NERSA process is that it's a transparent process. One. Two is that there's going to make a very public how they have arrived at that determination. And it is at that point that the public can critique that process. But I'm not about to interfere in that process because by definition it's independent. If I've got views around what this tariff structure or determination should be, I'll subject myself to that process. And in fact, we'll be making our contribution to that process. So there's no exceptionalism with regards to minister's contribution. It's a set and established process, and that's why the integrity of that process has to be protected by all means. It's transparent, and the determination will be transparent, and it will be tabled before the country on how NERSA arrived at that determination.
Okay. The other big issue we must talk about is the prepaid meter issue. Long queues in certain parts of Soweto today. And this is a complex issue, but it's a technical issue. No one can change the deadline. This is not something government or Eskom or anyone implemented. This is a software issue. There needs to be an update. I've got to say, it would seem, if you look at those queues, that Eskom could have handled this slightly better and could still possibly handle it slightly better. We shouldn't have old people queuing as they're having to do right now.
You're absolutely correct in relation to the point that we shouldn't be seeing the long queues. So perhaps for the interest of the listeners is to say the following, is that this is a process that started much early in the year, and Eskom has gone out public to announce that there's a need for the customers to come through so that they can recode, if you like, their meters. So the expectation is that if you come to replenish your units through that process, then they get to recode. So it means that there's a big proportion of the people who are queuing who have not bought electricity for the past 8 months. But yet they have got the prepaid, they are consuming electricity, and they have not bought. And that's what we call the zero buyers. Otherwise, if we have been buying the past few months, as you go into replenish, then they recode, and there's no need for you to be coming now and queuing. But we do accept that there will be those instances where people would have gone out and they have not received the necessary assistance for various reasons. But we don't think that there is a majority of the 2.1 million that are still outstanding. There's 4.9 million who have subjected themselves to this process. They've been buying for the past 8 months, and the recording has been done. So what we've been doing now through the ministerial briefing is just to alert the country that, look, Eskom has been communicating to you. As a minister, I think I have an obligation to alert you that if you don't do this by the 24th of November, it's not like the date can be extended for reasons that you have explained. So it's a hard stop. And we don't want to have a situation where on the 25th, people are not able to buy. And that's why Eskom has pulled all the stops. But I want to emphasize, the process is not starting last week, it's not starting last month. Sure. The process has been ongoing for the past 8 months. And anyone who has bought electricity in that period is not on that queue.
Minister, I really appreciate the time. We promised 10 minutes. We've taken you for 13, so I really do appreciate you coming out of your meeting. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa is the Minister of Electricity and Energy.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the big announcement today, a 5 billion rand deal between Sanlam and 91. 91 will buy Sanlam Investment Management. In return, the Sanlam Group will own around 12.3% of 91. Sanlam will appoint 91 as its primary active investment manager. The CEO at 91 is Hendrik de Tooy. Hendrik, good evening to you. Busy day for you, I'm sure. How do you believe you're going to benefit from the deal? What are you getting from Sanlam?
Good evening, Stephen. Good evening, listeners. For us, this is a very important South African transaction in the sense that we get access to Sanlam's retail distribution as their primary active manager. They give us roughly 400 billion rand to manage through the sale of their investment management business. And of that, of course, about 20% is international, and we expect significant more flows on the international side coming from South Africa with the realignments of portfolios and the more open exchange control environment. And then finally, and very importantly, they've committed to be an anchor investor in our international credit strategies, which will accelerate the growth of those strategies, which are primarily sold into international markets. So I think it's a two-way deal, and we've Sanlam's been a client for many years, and we've taken it to the next level when they came to us and mentioned that they wanted to focus on, solutions for clients and not on active investment management.
So they approached you, right? That's how it worked.
That's correct. We obviously serviced them. This was a client talking to us about their strategic path, and we went back and thought about life and how we could work together in a mutually beneficial way.
You do have to get approval from shareholders, from regulators as well. You've made the point that this is quite a fragmented industry. Are you expecting any issues there? We have seen some intriguing regulatory decisions from competition authorities lately.
Even firstly, the reason we announced today is to make sure that we're ahead of the news curve or the news flow, because these are people, businesses, clients are very, possessive about who manages their money, correctly so. And so we just wanted to signal the intent well ahead of going to our shareholders and going to regulators that this is happening to avoid any rumors. I don't have personally much experience of the competition authority because 91 isn't a regular acquirer of business. Sanlam does. It will be a very thorough process. We expect this not to be a problem because the asset management industry is much more fragmented than many others, even though 91 is large in the South African context and the largest South African asset manager. The industry is still much more fragmented than many of the others over which the Competitions Commission would normally preside.
You also released your interim results today, and it's a 1% increase in closing assets under management. You've benefited from equity and bond markets. But you say that there's not much demand for risk-on strategies. Are you expecting that to continue? I mean, is this going to be an issue for emerging markets and presumably our own for some time?
You see, what we define as risk-on is what I would call full-fat equity offerings, and in the international context, emerging markets, and essentially not, all the action in our industry outside South Africa. South Africa has actually been a very normal market. In the rest of the world, since US interest rates went up sharply from just above 0 to over 5, it's now being cut again. But in that period, most money went to cash or money markets accounts. Huge demand for developed market fixed income and passive, and actually very little coming to active and particularly the risk strategies, i.e. emerging market fixed income, credit and equities. And I think we're seeing in the last sort of part of the reporting period and in the first part of the new 6 months, we have seen more appetite. Our pipelines are growing, but it's still not at the stage, at the levels we experienced in sort of middle 22, before the interest rate increases. And I think the US has essentially been sucking in the capital of the world, and we see that continuing for a while. But once US inflation goes up, and once people are starting to ask some questions about US governance, etc., I think capital will spread around the world again. But it's the beginning of better times. It's definitely not good times yet, and that explains a large percentage of our flow picture.
Very interesting comment. Thank you very much indeed. Hendrik du Toit, the CEO at 91.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Would you believe it's the turn of Chris Stewart, a portfolio manager at 91. Chris, good evening to you. A comment on your boss's strategy, please. Is it a good move?
Good evening, Stephen. Thanks very much. Yeah, I think it provides an exciting opportunity for 91 to increase its scale in South Africa. It increases the potential assets under management, predominantly in South Africa. Certain of these assets are outside of the country by about 400 billion rand. And it allows Sanlam, I think, to concentrate further on what they do best on the distribution front. And it allows 91 to focus on specialized asset management across those assets. I think from both parties, it could be considered to be a logical transaction to take place.
Tiger Brands today, quite late in the day, an announcement to 605 million rand, I think it is. They're selling all of their businesses. I wanted to call them their baby businesses, but their businesses related to baby products, not baby nutrition. And this is part of a longer-term strategy.
Yeah, it's part of their ongoing cleanup of non-core brands within the group. So they are selling their baby well-being business, as they put it, for around 605 million rand. That's predominantly toiletries and medicinal products. As you point out correctly, it doesn't include their baby nutrition business. Some of the brands you might have heard of that are being disposed of, Elizabeth Ann and Phipps. But particularly not the Purity product, even though Purity, as I understand, has certain brand affiliations with some of the toiletries and medicinal products. Those will be migrated away from the Purity brand towards the Elizabeth Ann's brand as part of this transaction.
Interest rate decision tomorrow. Inflation surprising on the downside today.
Yeah, we saw headline inflation coming in below the bottom end of the range, and that's the first time I think many people listening to the show will remember inflation having ever been below the target band, coming in, as I said, at 2.8%, driven admittedly to a large degree by a fairly steep decline in fuel prices that we've seen over the last 9 months or so. But equally well, food inflation also surprising to the downside, running at about 2.8% year on year. So that's encouraging signs. Core inflation, obviously ignoring some of the impacts of fuel price itself, coming in at 3.9% comfortably within the target range, and in fact below the midpoint of the range. So, it's certainly secured. If there wasn't really much doubt that we were going to see a 25 basis point cut tomorrow, some people, I guess, would be arguing on the strength of this for a 50 basis point cut, given what we are seeing globally, where the expectations of interest rate cuts are being moderated on the back of expectations that a Trump regime might be slightly more inflationary than previously anticipated, will probably result in further conservatism from the monetary authorities in South Africa. So I think we'll probably only go 25 basis points tomorrow. But if there was ever any doubt about that, this has made it a sure thing, I would guess.
And NVIDIA earnings out tonight. That's probably going to drive US markets, suck in more of that capital from around the world.
That may well be doing exactly that, or spit some of it out, depending on whether NVIDIA beat or miss. It's one of those stocks that is typically priced for perfection, and one of those stocks where we see disproportionately large moves on a quarterly basis every time they report results, either on the upside or the downside. So whichever way that turns out, for one data point, the expectations are heightened, and it's going to make for an exciting trading evening in the US tonight.
Chris Stewart, thanks so much. Portfolio manager at 91.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567. A pleasant surprise on the downside for inflation. Consumer price inflation for October, 2.8%. You heard the comment from Chris Stewart earlier. Who can remember when inflation came in below the inflation targeting band of the Reserve Bank? It's also the lowest since the hard lockdown during the pandemic in 2020. Koketso Mano is a senior economist at FNB. Koketso, good evening. I mean, this surely bakes in a 25 basis point cut by the Reserve Bank tomorrow. Any chance of a bigger Christmas present, do you think?
Good evening, Stephen, and hello to all of your listeners. I think, given the fact that the inflation is performing in a very benign manner, so it does create that space for the Reserve Bank. The starting point is already lower than what we had anticipated. So maybe it even creates lower inflation going into next year. So that's positive. And also we've seen the Fed continuing to cut interest rates as well. They are 75 basis points in. We're only 25 basis points in. So maybe a lot of people are starting to think, hey, we have a lot of space here to catch up and maybe implement 50 tomorrow. The odds of that are there. However, I wouldn't be doing justice if I didn't caution everyone that the Reserve Bank is a very conservative, or the MPC rather, is a very conservative group. So they're probably going to be thinking about, the fact that demand might pick up locally. They're going to think about all the risks globally around tariffs, how that could be inflationary, and also just how that could influence, financial conditions globally, with the Fed already saying we might slow down the pace at which we're cutting interest rates. So they're probably going to keep that in mind, and we think the odds of a 25 are just higher at this point than a 50, but it's not off the cards completely.
It also shows you, it's just another example of what happens when how important fuel prices are. They're down significantly from a year ago, and that's largely responsible for today's figure.
Definitely. It's one of the major contributors to why we're seeing lower inflation, even over the past few months, right? So we saw cuts coming through at the pumps for quite some time. Only in November did we now start to see an increase. So fuel deflation has been quite supportive here. But there are other factors, right? As I said in my previous statement, demand is expected to start picking up, right? But we are still dealing with a very low demand environment. So you're seeing that a lot with the underlying pressures. So if you think about your core inflation items, for example, you will see that we're dealing with very benign demand conditions. The other thing is that when you come from a period of very high inflation, so 2022, 2023, going into 2024, that momentum is starting to show, or the loss of momentum is starting to show. And you're seeing that when you compare this year's level to last year's level. So that's also playing into the numbers quite strongly.
It's part of a much bigger story, right? I mean, it's part of a global inflation story. Inflation around the world does seem to be coming down. I hear what you say about the Fed and others. Can we put the inflation bogey to bed, or do we still need to be quite careful?
We need to be very careful, actually. And I think the Fed, or the U.S. numbers rather, have given us some of that indication. So we did see, even in that country, they went into 2024, benefiting from these positive base effects when you look at the year-on-year numbers. And now that those base effects are coming out of the system, you're starting to really now deal with, demand conditions and whether that is still stimulating inflation. And you can see in the US, for example, how that has turned the corner, and it's probably going to keep the Fed a bit more cautious. For South Africa, we only see, the number starting to creep up above 4% in the middle of 2025. Unfortunately, that will be the same time that you're probably seeing people spending a little bit more because financial conditions have improved with lower interest rates, lower inflation, the two-part system. So the MPC being a forward-looking or using a forward-looking mechanism is going to be thinking about that. Inflation is going to, or demand-driven and underlying inflation is going to become something that the MPC will have to keep its eye on going into 2025.
I mean, administered prices, we've discussed fuel already, but I mean, Eskom's application is being consulted on this week. I mean, electricity is still, part of the bogeyman, part of the monster.
Exactly. Admin prices remain above inflation, headline inflation. And we all know, especially in provinces like Gauteng, even cities like Johannesburg, water remains an issue. They say it's a demand issue. So that means that you control demand by hiking prices. So the administered prices are unfortunately going to remain in strong view when you think about inflation. Then there's something else, Stephen. Going into 2024, what we saw is that the normalization in services inflation started to come up. Think about medical insurance, for example, how those increases were very strong this year. And unfortunately, when you look at the media and what the announcements are, from a lot of these medical aids, you can see that 2025 is going to be another difficult year when it comes to price increases. So the normalization in services is still ongoing. So unfortunately, yes, we are enjoying now the positive base effects, which I always try to explain, the level this year compared to the level last year. We're enjoying that, but the real crux of inflation is still something that we need to grapple with.
Koketso Mano, thank you very much indeed, Senior Economist at FNB.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the 2024 Black Friday edition of the Africa Impact Matters series podcast. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider.
Well, now emerging today that the National Department of Water Affairs and Sanitation telling the National Treasury to block a series of grants worth 500 million rand to a group of municipalities who haven't paid the water boards that provide them with water. I mean, you're kind of falling over in shock, right? You hear that councils aren't paying their bills. The Water Affairs Minister, Pemi Madrodina, saying to Parliament that water boards are in danger of collapsing. They're not funded by national government. They're actually funded by the money they're paid by councils for providing water. In other words, if you've got one group of customers and those customers don't pay you, well, obviously, financially, you're going to collapse. Dr. Ferial Adams, Executive Manager at WaterCan. Ferial, good evening. Some of the details in this are just staggering. Majabeng, a council in the Free State, they owe Vaal Central Water 7 billion rand. And from what I can see, they just refuse to pay it.
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners. Yes, and that is a big concern. And it's not only, it's also Mahali's water. But what had happened was, if you remember, there was Sedibeng Water Board that was similarly bankrupted because of non-payment, and those areas were then shared between Mahali's water and Vaal Central, and the same thing is happening again.
I mean, it just shows you can shift things all you like. You actually have to fix the underlying problem.
Absolutely. And what this actually tells us, because we've been talking about, there's two things that we as WaterCan have asked for. One was ring fencing of money for water and sanitation, which the minister mentioned in her previous briefing. So that's a great thing. But the other thing we've been asking for is, if municipalities are not paying the water boards, then instead of giving, grants or any funding directly to the municipalities, they should bypass them and give it directly to the water board so that they can continue carrying on. And what this is saying to us is that we think the Treasury now is actually legally unable to take the equitable share grant and pay the water boards directly, which is actually, it's a problem, because then you'll get like we have now, where they'll just say, well, sorry, you're not paying.
So, the National Treasury can block payments, I suppose. As you say, I think you must be right legally. But it almost doesn't matter what happens. The councils are not going to pay, and I presume that in most cases they actually can't pay.
That is exactly the problem, is that how is it that they cannot pay or pay even a little? How did it get to this point? And that's, I think that over and over, different sectors of government have been saying, okay, we will give you the same thing's happening with City of Joburg and City Power. Work out the debt. Let's see how we can work this out. And I think that we have to at some point really analyze how our municipalities are functioning, because we cannot have this. Imagine if this happens across the country. We've got the City Power issue in Joburg. We've got now these two water boards that are going to end up bankrupt. It's going to affect basic cities and how they function.
I'm reminded, I think there was a News 24 report this morning that Mogale City, huge problems with water, and they're spending some money on BMWs.
Exactly. The Mogale City is mind-boggling. The fact that they are now building a 6-story new building, rather than fixing the Percy Stewart wastewater treatment work. I think what we need to see is that where there are payments that are 90 days or more in arrears, councillors, municipal managers, and heads of those utilities have to have their pay cut, or they must be suspended. But if you don't have some action on the people that are responsible for those entities, this is just going to carry on.
So doesn't it get to the heart of the problems with water, which is actually the bigger problems with water are all about local government. And if they're about local government, you have to fix local government if you want to fix water.
I think it's a combination. I think that what we've been seeing over the last while is that a lot of the attention has been on local government. And yes, they're not, and we need to fix local government to get that working. But I do think that this is a historical thing, and that we cannot forget that for about 10 years, national government was in this slump or dark ages of capture. And that has impacted. That has impacted what we see now. It's impacted the services. It's impacted the state of pollution. So I think that there has to be a way that municipalities are just not going to do it on their own. The AG report is clear. Many municipalities are failing. How do we manage that with saying to municipalities, no, you've got to fix it, when they just can't? How do we do that? And there has to be some level of intervention from national.
So if we look at actually what's happening, yes, there has to be some level of intervention. I remember the previous Minister, Sinzo Mkhunu, tried many times, in fact, held community meetings in eThekwini, basically to allow residents to shout at the mayor. Wouldn't there be a queue? But if you look at places like Joburg's an example, today they voted, the council voted themselves an increase, not a huge increase, but still the signal is kind of there. What I'm trying to get to is, actually, without that political action, we're going to see the kind of failure that you see in Mogale City everywhere. And Joburg, we know, is going to have big problems. They won't be the only one.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think that there's definitely, it's an urgent issue, and that municipalities are going to keep giving themselves increases, buying BMWs, if they do not start losing their jobs. And that's the thing. There's no repercussions for bad behavior or mismanagement of funds. And for as long as that's going to go on at local government, whether we elect new people, whether we change the municipal, guidelines, etc., it's still going to carry on. We really need to see that people are being held accountable. The same thing with, the Dipolaseng municipality that's going to be paying a fine for the pollution, is that it's easy for them to pay the fine. Well, they don't have the money, but it's the municipality. The people working there still get their money. They still have their jobs. Until we start firing people, holding people accountable, there's this kind of mismanagement, this kind of neglect will continue. And that, for me, is where we need to intervene.
Dr. Ferial Adam, thanks very much indeed, Executive Manager at WaterCan. Really do appreciate the time. Sobering, I'm afraid, to say water can be, but it does just tell you, the scale of the problem. And again, so much of it is about politics, it's about local government, in particular, so many things that need to fix. In about 10 minutes from now, we'll speak to Advaita Naidu from Jackhammer Global about how to get the raise, not that you dream of, but the raise that you deserve. Your stories too, please. How did you do it? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. You with The Money Show, 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the 2024 Black Friday edition of the Africa Impact Matters series podcast. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of the program. Have you ever been able to get the increase that you know you deserved? I mean, has it ever happened without you having to sort of threaten, cajole, get an offer from someone else, all of that stuff? Have you ever been able to actually go to someone and say, you know what I'm worth, pay me more, pay me X, and have you ever got X? Well, if you haven't, like me, I think just about everybody else I know, we'll find out some tips on how to do that with Business Unusual in just a moment. It's a really interesting conversation. Also, something fishy going on with some of the counterfeit goods issue. Consumer ninja Wendy Nola looking at that, and the story around the sort of fake pilchard saga gets more and more interesting. There's sort of parts of the story I really didn't expect. You'll hear that in a couple of moments as well. And then in your studio just now, Alessandro Khojani, I should say, the chef and entrepreneur behind Gemeli, one of the biggest restaurants, one of the most well-known restaurants in Johannesburg. We'll just ask him a little bit about his business, how he got into it, and also, what's the question that CEOs hate? What do you do to relax? Isn't that the question that CEOs seem to hate? I mean, maybe we'll run a competition. Who can give us the best answer to what do you do to relax? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
So you decide that you've been working at a place for a while, you quite like the office, but you decide that you're worth a bit more. And so you sit down and you think to yourself, I'm going to go and say to my boss, and maybe their boss, I think you should pay me more. How do you feel? Yeah, me too. You feel that sort of sweat. You think that, am I worth more? Really? Do I have to do this? Maybe I should write an email. Maybe I should ask someone else. Maybe I just shouldn't do this. Well, Advaita Naidu, Africa MD at Jackhammer Global, has been looking at this question. Advaita, good evening. I think, frankly, when you think about how do I start that conversation with my boss, I'm worth more, I just want to run away. And I don't think I'm the only one.
Well, Stephen, I'm so sorry. I work in a great company, so I don't, immediately identify with this problem. But we do work for a lot of big South African companies, and I think the biggest thing is that corporate culture tends to be quite hierarchical. So salary discussions feel challenging because of the structure. There's a real power dynamic in place, but also talking about money is really it's like the last taboo when it comes to the workplace, because personally and professionally, we've been socialized into thinking that we must be very grateful for our lot in life, and that it is improper or unrefined to talk about money. And I think that's where part of the problem lies.
Is there a part of it in that you're actually going to be judged very honestly with a salary increase? So people can, blow smoke. People can say you're great. They can do all sorts of things. But when it comes to money is actually the true value that you bring to a company. And that's what makes, because it's so brutally honest one way or another.
Yeah, that's true. I think, look, the important thing is not to assume that companies are taking advantage of employees and really just trying to eke maximum value at the lowest cost. There may be understandable reasons why people aren't currently on a salary that is entirely appropriate. In the past, they may have received only inflation-linked increases that doesn't match where they should be now. Raises may have been put on hold due to company performance in the past. There is a more or less justified reason that, there may be inequality based on race or gender bias. But I think we really need to think about how to go into these conversations, not assuming that people don't want to pay us what we're worth, and really to demystify and take the pressure off the conversation. So like you said, we want to be paid what's fair for what we bring to the table, and we want the opportunity to improve our life situation through wealth creation. There's no shame in that. So let's go in and have the open and honest conversation and not assume that people are really trying to get the best of us.
Okay, so how do we start? A bit of preparation, I suppose.
Preparation, absolutely. I mean, isn't that the answer to everything? So I think there are probably 4 components to this preparation. You need to talk about your contribution. So like you were saying, talk about what you bring to the table, but think about it carefully. Think about your whole portfolio of work and the history of your performance. Don't fall foul of the recency bias. Don't overemphasize 1 or 2 key achievements. Talk about how your work has impacted the company. And, people like to talk about the bottom line. Talk about your value in terms of the contribution that you've brought out. But the other element of preparation is thinking about industry standards. Have you spoken to other people at the company who are doing similar roles? Have you spoken to people outside of the company? Have you spoken to a recruiter? Have you looked at job boards? The market is what the market is, but understanding the context of your skills in the broader talent landscape and leveraging your unique value proposition is another thing that people should do, and unfortunately they don't. And then when you go into the conversation, practice your talking points ahead of time. Think of it as a presentation. Anticipate the potential questions and the counter arguments. You wouldn't go into a keynote or a speech without your talking points, and this is similar. Don't go in unprepared. And the last thing is to consider alternatives. Like, really just be pragmatic about it. You want to achieve convergence between your expectations and what the company can offer you, but you also need to know when to push and when not to do so if a company legitimately isn't able to accommodate the increase at that moment. For whatever reason, there may be financial constraints, or more importantly, they need to maintain parity across the organization. So come up with a couple of other ideas.
It's interesting that, because you basically need to prepare for rejection, and you've got to steel yourself for that. You've got to try and be as unemotional as you can about it.
You can, and I think that's really easier said than done. But I think once we divorce ourselves from the outcomes and go in, making the best possible business case and thinking about it rationally and commercially, and don't think about what the outcome is, I think we're going to do ourselves more favors in that way. But it is also pragmatic to be prepared for your request to be turned down. If this worst case scenario does materialize, stay calm. Ask questions, ask them why, ask for specific feedback, ask them what you may need to do and under what circumstances an increase might be available. And then if the answer is no, if that's your walk away point, that's your walk away point. There's no need to be emotional about it and risk ruining an otherwise good relationship.
Should you tell anyone in the office that you're asking? And anyone you tell, you'll have to tell the outcome to.
I don't see why not. I think it really is incumbent upon companies to be a bit more transparent about salary than they have been in the past. One, to avoid situations like this where people are, where there is this power imbalance and people don't know what they're worth or what they're entitled to. I think, pay transparency is so standard in the Nordics, for example, or, in the US in certain states. You're not allowed to ask candidates what they earn. However, salary bands must be published. This is easier in large organizations where you have a large knowledge worker component and roles are similar. It's less possible where roles are not copy-paste across the organization, but transparency is so important, especially in a country like South Africa where there could be gender and race imbalances in pay.
Is it worth trying? I think a lot of people will try this. You want to sort of email it, or you want to tip the boss off so that they can stop you if it's going to be embarrassing. You know, you could schedule a meeting or a meeting request for salary or something. Then everybody kind of knows what's being discussed and they can sort of tap you on the shoulder and say, look, I saw your meeting request. I don't think it's a good idea. And then, you know, there's less embarrassment.
I mean, honestly, I don't think any manager or company should ever say upfront, this is a bad idea. I think they should hear everybody out. Companies also need to take the pragmatic approach and calculate the cost of a salary increase versus the cost of replacing an employee who decides to leave. And, you know, I know nobody wants to feel bullied into spending more, but there is always a balance to be struck. And by not giving the person the chance to be heard out, you risk them being disengaged to start and not having made the case, which actually could have turned out better for you than had you not turned down the meeting.
If you get turned down, be angry. I mean, I wonder sometimes if a boss might think, well, this is the starting point for you preparing to leave the company, if you see what I mean. You've got to do you need to sort of take that off the table early on, even though if that weakens your negotiating position?
You should. I mean, I think the psychology of it almost is if you've received an offer from another company, it's seldom about the money, and coming back to your own organization, you already have one foot out the door. There was something in the organization that was pushing you. It's never that, somebody offered me more money and I'm only leaving for the money. So I think if you have this kind of unsettled feeling to begin with, yes, absolutely have the conversation sooner rather than later. And then I think just a cautionary piece of advice for the individuals, again, it's never helpful to make these make or break conversations. You may decide to leave if your request hasn't been met. But again, there's never a reason to turn it into a volatile situation and become disengaged if it is turned down. You will end up leaving on bad terms.
There's so much to it. I mean, it can completely change your relationship with your boss. I mean, you might come out of it feeling more respected than you expected and actually a lot better about yourself. You may have the complete opposite response. I mean, that's why the stakes are so high. It is about money, but it's not just about money.
I was just about to say it actually, I think that the money is the outcome, but actually there's so much underlying the emotion in that. And I think the way people handle it will really tell you a lot about themselves and what their breaking points are. You know, again, that's why it's important to stay calm. And again, why having those alternative ideas might be a good idea, because if it's not just about the money and it's more about the value and deriving more value on both ends, you can offer alternatives like, could I have more leave days? Could I have more flexible working arrangements? Are there professional development opportunities or one-time bonuses for me, which can be funded from discretionary budgets? You know, compromise. I mean, I say this to my children all the time. There is a compromise. There is a balance to be struck in there. It's not one person winning and the other person feeling aggrieved.
Advita Naidu, thanks so much. Africa MD at Jackhammer Global. Look, your stories, please. Did you get the money that you deserved? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Your Consumer Ninja, of course, Wendy Nola joining us. Wendy, good evening. Strange developments around the sort of counterfeit Lucky Star pilchard story. So there was this raid by the police last week in Gauteng. They found suspected sort of counterfeit Lucky Star pilchard cans, label printing machines, things like that. Best before dates had been changed. The cans were being packed into Woolworths cartons. People were arrested. Then the company that produces Lucky Star put out a statement saying it had nothing to do with that project. What's happened since then?
Okay. So yes, the company said they sort of shed light on what had happened. Investigations revealed that an international manufacturer produced the canned pilchards under the Woolworths brand. The retailer had it imported here, and then when they got them, they rejected the consignment for unspecified reasons and asked the supplier to collect it. This is according to Oceana, the producer of Lucky Star pilchards. After collection, some of the consignment appears to have been intercepted and illegally relabeled as Lucky Star and repacked into the Woolworths labeled cartons. They weren't Woolworths cartons genuinely, right? They were just, everything was kind of being faked and forged here, right? So they put these relabeled, rejected pilchards that came from overseas, had nothing to do with Lucky Star pilchards based in the Western Cape. And the point of the big point that Oceana wanted to make in its press release of yesterday, Stephen, was the fact that the easy to open ring pull cans that were found in the facility was further proof that the seized products were not of Lucky Star origin. And they said, Lucky Star cans do not have ring pull or easy opening lids. We don't use them on our canned pilchards. End of, that was the statement. Very emphatic.
Okay, but
so
that's not entirely the story, though. I mean, there's more to this, isn't there?
Well, that wasn't the full truth, and it wasn't anything that they needed to want to keep to themselves. They just inadvertently left out something crucial. So what it should have said was, while the standard 400-gram can does not have the easy-to-open ring pull lids, it's the old-fashioned thing that you need to get a can opener out for, its little 155-gram cans do have the ring pull. And here's why that became a problem. Spar is currently running a promo on various food products. You know, there's big ads with all the different products, pictures of them, etc. Selected Spar stores in Pretoria and the Limpopo area. The ad features a bundle deal of a 6-pack of 115-gram cans of Lucky Star pilchards and several packs of 2-minute noodles, another manufacturer. And the images, and if you don't read the teeny tiny print, they look like normal sized Lucky Star, you know, the normal can, 400 grams. They've got ring pulls on them. So, which is very unfortunate given what Oceana just said yesterday. We don't use ring pulls on our pilchards, right? So, Maggie of Kempton Park, she spotted this advert on the massive One Family, One Stockpile Facebook group. It means a whole community in itself, Stephen, 765,000 members plus. So she took to X, to Twitter, to post a question to the Spar group. Where did you get the ring pull lid pilchards? Because Lucky Star in their statement said they don't use ring pull lids on their pilchards. Are you selling counterfeit goods? Which I think was a reasonable question given what we were told by Oceana, right? So I took up the issue with Spar's head office earlier today. They obviously got a huge fright. And I said, why is your Spar, your stores up north selling these, you know, supposedly counterfeit cans? And they also went to Oceana's spokespeople, and it came out that, you know, actually those are 150-gram cans, and they do carry the ring pull. So it was a case of, you know, there's nothing wrong with the cans. What Spar's got is for the record, is all fine. There's little cans. It was just a case of omission. And I think, especially such a volatile story, it was quite a big omission to effectively say we don't use them on our cans without clarifying, you know, only the little cans. So I think just for corporates to take a breath, even in the heat of the moment of these kinds of crises, to communicate fully and clearly, so that these kinds of misunderstandings don't happen, which create a lot of drama all over the place.
I mean, consider how much money they spend on communication, you know. I always say, get someone who is not involved to look at it and ask as many questions as they can. I mean, that's really what you need to do. I mean, it's an astonishing story. Wendy, there was a story we chatted about a few weeks ago about what looked like some kind of insurance fraud. Someone had been killed just a couple of days before. People had increased the amount of his life insurance. You couldn't tell us very much at the time. There's been updates on that.
Yes. It was a funeral policy. I didn't name names. I didn't name the person. I just said that someone who said that his relative, his first cousin, had been gunned down tragically, and he was trying to claim from a funeral policy he took out with Capitec on the whole lot of family members, including 3 first cousins. And for some reason, they weren't paying out. He was having to borrow money, and it was all very unfortunate, and basically wanting me to put pressure on Capitec to pay out. It was apparently 60,000 rand. And there's no waiting period, interestingly enough, in an unnatural death. If it's a natural death, there's a year's waiting period. But anyway, so apparently he went to the EFF, he went to Gate McKenzie, he went all over the place on social media. It wasn't just me, which I thought at the time. And anyway, then last Thursday, the man who pleaded for my help in turning the screws on Capitec, Wanda Mbele, and his sister Sindiswa appeared in the Athlone Magistrates Court on charges of fraud and money laundering relating to the gunning down of actor David, known as Gums Manuel. He was one of the 3 people which Mbele allegedly falsely claimed on national policy his first. Their bail application is tomorrow. They're back in court tomorrow, a week later. I went back to Capitec to ask a whole lot of questions, and they were like, we're not going to comment on personal relationships or individual policy details. He confirmed that there's no waiting period for non-natural deaths. And I asked how many active funeral policies does Capitec have? 3 million as at the end of August. That's really substantial. They used to be actually underwritten by Sun Lam, but at the end of August they've terminated that relationship and they're doing their own thing, which is interesting. But yeah, it was a very interesting turn of events. When I read that news story, I thought, okay,
yeah,
sure. Yes, quite cheeky, really. It's all allegations. They haven't obviously they've not been found guilty of anything. But yeah, quite an unusual case that I took up originally, thinking, oh, this is not okay. They must pay out, of course, So yeah, interesting.
Sure. Amazing. I mean, people will try anything, really, won't they? Wendy Nola, thank you. Your consumer ninja. And I mean, just an astonishing story that the people who approached her, it turns out, have now been arrested and face charges. In a moment, we'll speak to the owner of Gemelli Restaurants, Alessandro Alex Khojani. Lots to ask him about, of course, starting the restaurants, what's like, how you end up cooking professionally. Not everybody does. I certainly haven't, and I'm fairly certain never will. And then also, of course, questions around just what it's like running a business in very difficult times in South Africa. I'm quite looking forward to this, actually. But he'll be your shapeshifter this evening. He's sitting right behind me, and he'll be your shapeshifter this evening for half an hour, all the way through until 8 o'clock. Your questions for him as well, please, on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. Voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702. Lots to look forward to in that conversation, tasty conversation with your shapeshifter coming up in just a moment. You with The Money Show, just gone 7:30.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
23 minutes now to 8 the time. Well, interesting to invite someone who's kind of done his own thing. And he's done it through something that most people can do. He's just a little better. Say a little better at it. I'm talking about Alex Khojani. He's the owner of Gemelli Restaurants. If you spent any time in Joburg, you probably know where Gemelli is. Alex, good evening. Thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Only a pleasure, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. I mean, do you remember the first time you cooked?
Oh, yeah, I remember pretty much. In a restaurant or just in general?
Just in general.
The first time I cooked in general, funny enough, I've actually replayed this in my head, was with my sister. In Italy. My sister used to always make us breakfast.
Yeah.
My sister Miponi used to always make us breakfast, eggs with homemade bread. And I remember my first ever meal I cooked was eggs with my sister.
It's my son's first meal too. So so moving from cooking for yourself and going into it, as you're going through school, for example, I mean, was cooking always on the horizon for you?
It wasn't at all, to be honest, Stephen. Like, cooking was not... I cooked at home because my sister cooked, and I actually didn't cook. I made eggs.
Yeah.
And then I started cooking in Durban, funny enough. I was supposed to go to varsity, and I didn't go to varsity. And I partied. And then and then my second year of varsity, I decided to work in a restaurant.
Yeah.
It started off with waitering. And I always say, I've worked for a few brands, but there's only one man that can take pure responsibility in my growth as a restaurateur, my decision to become a restaurateur, and there's Marco Conti from Durban. He owns a restaurant called Marco's, and I worked for him. And then his mom, he was opening a new store, and then he hired a couple of new guys. And you know how Italian men are with their moms, like their moms are gold.
Yeah.
And he wasn't comfortable with all these new guys being in the kitchen with his mom, and he knew I could speak Italian because I was raised in Italy, just by default.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the plan, but just by default, I was raised in Italy. And that's how I started cooking. I started cooking with Luciana in the kitchen in Durban.
Sure. And I mean, so you're doing that. I mean, it's hard work. It's late at night. It's difficult. I mean, I don't know if all of the swearing is true, but
it's very true. Ask my team; they'll tell you all about it.
But I presumed it was.
Yeah.
What was it about that you enjoyed so much? I mean, I think a lot of people thinking about it and watching it think, oh no, I can think of nothing worse. But for you, clearly, it's intoxicating.
You know what the real truth is? Like, now that you asked that question, I'm thinking about it. The truth is, I didn't like homework. The restaurant game, there's no homework, bro. Like you work your shift, you're done with your shift, you go to bed, you wake up, tomorrow's a new day. You're not carrying homework home, except for chefs, except for professional chefs. So I'm not a professional chef, I'm a cook. Professional chefs do a lot of homework to come up with a dish. Us cooks, the chef comes to us, they're like, all right, we got this dish, let's work on this dish, and you cook it. It's a great dish, and your day is over. The following day is a brand new day. I hated homework.
I mean, there's an honesty to that as well, and the fact that the next day, it doesn't matter what went wrong day one, day two is different.
It's over. Like, and the restaurant game is heated for a couple of hours, and then the following day is a new day. And it's up to you. Some people like that work in the restaurant game carry the pressure of yesterday into today. I don't do that. What happened yesterday. If I'm very upset, I'll be upset for 3-4 days, depending on what you did. But then it's over. It's not like I hold it over your head for the rest of your life. Yeah.
So you're in Durban. You're working for Mrs. Conti.
I'm working for Mrs. Conti and Mr. Conti.
Mr. Conti. Well, how did you end up in Joburg? What happened after that?
My sister's mate bought into a franchise called Koketso Pizzeria. And I flew up from Durban to be a proxy at Koketso for this lady. And I worked there for a little bit. And in 2012, I moved to another brand. So between 2007 and 2012, I worked for Koketso. But when I moved here, I've always wanted to open this restaurant called Jameli. Jameli because my brother and I look alike. Jameli represents family. Our tagline is Jameli la familia prima, which means family first. And I've always wanted to open this restaurant called Jameli, and the opportunity never came till 2015.
So, I mean, how did the opportunity come? You would have needed capital. And I mean, yes, you were working, you were working hours in the kitchen. I mean, to build up that capital like that, that's tough. I mean,
my success is purely based on relationships.
Yeah.
I've actually realized that. Like, I genuinely enjoy human beings, and I'm genuinely interested in you as a person, whether you're a customer, whether you're a staff member. I'm genuinely interested in you. So I was lucky enough to meet a gentleman that owned a company called Dimension Data, him and a couple of other gentlemen. It was about 3 or 4, 5 gentlemen.
Software guys.
Bunch of legends, to be honest. And I was working for a brand, and when I left that brand, I quit that other brand I was working for. And when I left that brand, this gentleman was like, where are you going? And I'm like, at the time I wanted to go to New York to bust tables because I believed I was at the top of my game in all Italian restaurants in Gauteng. And this gentleman by the name of Jeremy Ord was like, young man, you don't know it yet, but you're going to open your own restaurant one day. And when you do, call me. And I was like, oh man, I don't know. Hey, I'm going to America. I'm not going to do this thing. And the day came and my brother was like, bro, you've been talking about this great brand called Jameli that you're going to open. Why are you being a little chicken? Open up. And then I remembered Jeremy's conversation with me, and I called him. And I'm like, Jeremy, remember you told me I'm going to open my own restaurant? He's like, yeah. You're going to do it, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do it. He's like, all right, let's have a meeting.
Sure.
I met him. Maybe literally a week later, he deposited money in my bank account. My brother deposited money in the account, and we started.
Sure.
From nowhere. It was crazy.
You talk about having the brand in your head, and a lot of people I speak to who start their own thing will have been thinking about something, and there's a lot of passion in it. And I can see it. I mean, I can just see it sitting here, coming out of you. I mean, clearly, Jameli, the name had been with you for a while. You had an idea of what you wanted to do.
The reason why we called it Jameli, because my brother and I look alike. And my brother, funny enough, his name isn't Kgosientsho. He's the guy that studied hotel management and restauranting. I've never gone to any formal school on how to become a restaurateur, on how to run a business. I've just learned on the job. So Ntai and I look alike. A lot of people say we look alike. I'm better looking personally.
Oh, obviously. I mean, I could tell you that.
So Ntai and I decided to call this restaurant Jameli because Jameli means twins in Italian. That's the only reason why we came up with this name Jameli. And this name was from 2007. crazy enough when I moved to Joburg.
Restaurants are about more than that. You have to design a menu. You need a kind of decor. You need I don't know what the right word is, but you need a kind of feel for it, I say, throwing my hands up in the air.
100%.
I mean, you clearly had something in your head already about all of those things.
I had a visual of food that catered to the whole family.
Yeah.
Right? I come from a diverse family. I come from family members that are very rural, and I got very hoity-toity family members, like my sisters and them. We call them the Kardashians.
I'm going to use that.
So we had to build a menu. I decided in my head, I wanted to build a menu where my uncles from the Lesotho Mountains can come and eat, and my sisters can come eat, and my mates that I went to school with can come have a great meal. And I didn't find a restaurant that had that. And Italian restaurants are pretty simple and are pretty great, and I love Italian food because I understand it, and that's all I knew. And I've been asked this question, why Italian? And I'm like, bro, I'm like a taxi owner. Like, you start off by washing taxis, then you become a conductor, then you become a taxi driver, then you become a taxi owner. I started off as a waiter in an Italian restaurant. I became a restaurant manager in an Italian restaurant. I own an Italian restaurant. I cooked in an Italian restaurant. So I know Italian food. It's just a blessing I was raised in Italy and I could speak Italian. That was my party trick. That was Marco's party trick. He used to pull me out in the middle of shift when I was still a kid, and he'd be like, take this order in Italian. These guys are Italian. And he used to blow everybody's mind.
Yeah. I can imagine. There's something, I mean, when I think of an Italian restaurant, there's a Billy Joel song, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. I don't know if you know it. But there are lots of, there's a sense and atmosphere. You know, you think of the sort of red and white tablecloths. It's the first thing I think about.
Correct. I think red and white, huh?
There was one.
There
was one where I grew up in that we used to go to, and we lived near Yeovil. You go to Yeovil. It was called Mama's.
Yes.
I think they immigrated many years ago.
Yes.
But is there something about an Italian restaurant that, you know, other restaurants don't have? Is there I suppose a familiar, something to do with familiar, I should say, to it.
Italian restaurants are basically la familia. It's family. It's homely. I think everybody just feels comfortable at home. Like, Italian restaurants are basically, all you think about is the Italian mom in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And the food is meant to be shared. And I always say our food tastes better if there's a table of 6 people. You order a bunch of dishes, you put them in the middle of the table, and you pass them around. A steakhouse, you can't really do that, right? Like, you order your rump, you order your fillet, you order whatever you want, you eat a seafood.
And it's mine, and I've got a big knife. Yeah.
Correct. And with the Italian restaurant, there's a big bowl. And even in my visuals when I was designing it, was a big bowl with spoons in it. Because that's how I ate as a kid. I'm the last born of 6, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So we ate like that at home. In African tradition, we eat like that now. Like, you put a bowl of meat and a bowl of pap and cabbage if you're lucky, and 6, 7, 8, 9 guys will sit there and eat. Wash your hands and eat with your hands.
So you're designing a restaurant, you've got to design a menu, you've got an idea of the touch and feel. I always think for a lot of people, the big moment is when you employ someone. Because now you're not just responsible for you, Alex Khojani. You're not just responsible for your butt, who's not quite as good looking as you are.
Right.
You're now actually responsible for someone else. Do you remember who that first person was? Do you remember that moment?
The first people, I've been blessed enough that the people I started the restaurant with, we all worked together for a very long time. It was just an evolution from us working from this shop, and we all left to work to this shop, and then we left that shop and opened Jameli. So for us, it wasn't getting employed. It was just, boys, we're opening our own store. Let's open the store. So I didn't ever see anybody as an employee. I was just like, guys, we're opening a store. Let's rock. I think our first real employees, if I had to think about it, is our scullers. The guys that clean the kitchens and clean the floors. Everybody else, we've been a unit forever. So I never saw it as hiring employees. It was just, guys, we're adults now. Let's open our own store. Let's go.
Is that a big part of why the restaurant is so successful? That you're all kind of together.
Yeah, it's our restaurant is one big family, to be honest. From the team to customers I've seen customers go from a bachelor to getting married to having kids. It's an evolution. I've seen guys start their first job with a paycheck of like 5,000 Rand, and now the Oaks are pulling up in 4 million Rand cars at Jameli. So
you pass their numbers on.
And it's a family-based restaurant. That's literally what it is. I think the success of Jameli is it's not even our store as the Jameli team anymore. It's the people store. Like there's customers of ours that our bosses, like they sit there, even when we're designing stuff, they're like, Ale, I think you should do this. And I actually take it seriously and I listen and I look and they're actually right. So it's a team effort.
I do wonder, I mean, it's been a tough time in South Africa, right? We've seen, and it's the money show when you talk high interest rates, things like that. When we've seen people just not having as much money as they used to. And I mean, as the tough times stay tough for a long time, it gets harder and harder. It's cumulative. Has that affected you? Harder to run a restaurant when people don't have as much money? I mean, there'll be some people who always want to celebrate the deal, some people who always have money, but does it make it harder?
Because we are a luxury purchase, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to go out and eat. Has it affected us year on year? We've seen it. Now that I understand the business side of business, thanks to Andile Khumalo and Thabiso Hermanus, we've seen it. Because now you got to compare numbers year on year. We've seen that there's been a drop in turnover. The economy's tight.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've seen it. We're feeling it. But we're doing the best we can with what we have. And our current customers are supporting us and we're having a really good time. Like, even when it's bad, it's good with us, right? I think watching our customers, guys go through a bad time, they come to Jameli. Guys are having a great time, they come to Jameli. With us as well, if times are tough, we stay open, you know?
I'll tell Andile that he was mentioned on the Money Show.
Oh yeah, that's the chair of my board.
Yes.
Yeah.
The question, and we're going to talk more about this in a moment. We're speaking to Alex Khojani, the owner of Jameli's Restaurants, here with the Money Show. You know the question that people don't like to answer in our Shapeshifter segment? What do you do for fun? We'll ask Alex in just a moment. We'll see what his response is. 9 minutes to 8.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Alex Khojani, owner of Jameli Restaurants, with us in our studio. Okay, Alex, so it's become a running joke in this segment, unfortunately, that when I ask shapeshifters, what do you do for fun? They all say that they spend time with their families and they exercise. Now, you're allowed to do that. I do those things too.
Fair.
Please tell me you can do that and have a more interesting answer.
I honestly feel like exercise is kind of a have to do.
Yeah.
Especially when you work hard
in an Italian restaurant.
Correct.
Yes.
But for me, my fun time is riding bikes. I used to ride super bikes.
Oh yeah.
And in the good old days, my partners at the time were like, I gotta get off super bikes because if I die, the restaurant doesn't work.
Business, yeah.
So now I ride Harleys. So I'm a Harley rider. I love riding Harleys. The lamest thing I do for fun is sleep. I love to sleep, guys. Like, we don't have enough time to sleep. I sleep. That's my favorite thing to do is to sleep. But what really gets me going is riding my Harley.
Are you one of those people who go out to the cradle of humankind
100%,
on a Sunday?
100%. I go to Cradle. I'm the kind of guy that'll get on my Harley and go to Bloemfontein. One man.
Yeah.
I wake up in the morning. I'll stop my Harley. I'll go to Durban. One man. Get to Durban and then realize, I'm too lazy to ride back. I'll fly back. And I leave the bike there. I'll collect it some other day. So yeah, my favorite pastime is riding bikes.
Are there things about the business that after being in it for a long time are problems that just can't be fixed? I mean, things that are just frustrating. I mean, in the restaurant business, someone is in charge of cleaning the dishes.
Yeah.
Now, it's not you, but that's still a cost, a frustrating cost, and you basically have to be on day 17 of a water shortage before you're allowed to serve pizza on paper plates.
Correct. But, you repeat yourself so many times. Like, when corporate people come into the industry, they're like, why don't you just give them a warning and fire them? I'm like, you can't, because this is the person that does this thing every day. You got to keep it consistent. The irritating thing about restaurants is that you repeat yourself every day.
Yeah.
Every day you're repeating yourself, saying the same thing. And I'm like, bro, you've been with me for 9 years. Every second day I'm telling you to clear the ashtrays.
Yeah.
Like, there shouldn't be more than 2 cigarette butts in the ashtray. But when I walk into a restaurant, there'll be 3 cigarette butts in the ashtray. It's just stuff. Like, you got to repeat yourself. Like, if you don't get the restaurant game, I've had a couple of guys from corporate come into the game and they're like, how do you repeat yourself so many times? And for me, it's like an everyday conversation.
Happens in corporates too. I mean, don't.
You guys have HR and you fire people in corporate. There we have a conversation, a harsh conversation, and then you get in line for like 3 months.
When you look back on it, and you look where you are now and where you started, there's obviously a lot of hard work. And I mean, people will often in these conversations downplay a little bit the hard work because it's a bit boring.
Right.
Very important. Was there a bit of luck?
I don't believe it was luck.
Yeah.
I believe it's relationships.
Yeah.
I seriously take my relationships with people very seriously. I believe I am where I am just by having relationships and being honest and straightforward with people. From finding my shop that I built at Jameli, at Post House and Link, I knew a gentleman by the name of David Rice. David Rice was one of the directors at Redefine. And when I was looking to open my own store, David and Pat have always known that Pat is his wife, they've always known I wanted to open my own store. I knew their son Dylan when I was still working at Kokake Pizzeria in 2008 when he went to Michael House. So many years later, 2015, I'm opening a restaurant, and guess who the landlord is? David Rice. So it's just pure relationships. My financier, Jeremy Ord, Duncan Crabe. They're just guys that I met in the restaurant, and they enjoy the service I gave them when I still worked for other people.
Yeah.
So is it luck or is it relationships? I believe it's pure relationships.
People starting out a business now, restaurant or otherwise, certain things you would say to them, listen, youngster, you need to know this, you need to know that. I mean, obviously people.
Don't do it.
Sheesh. Brutal.
Take your cash, put in a 30-day account. You make a lot more money that way. Like the restaurant game is either in your blood or it's not in your blood. Like, I don't know a successful restaurateur that hasn't been a restaurateur since he was a kid. I don't know. You got to be a restaurateur to be a restaurateur.
Do you get to spend much time in the kitchen now?
I'm blessed enough to have a phenomenal team where I get surprised by the food myself. So I don't spend time in the kitchen anymore because I've got a phenomenal team. Chef Guy is doing a great job. My back office team is phenomenal. My admin team is phenomenal. My only job now is just to make sure everybody's sane throughout the whole year. Right?
Do you miss it, being in the kitchen?
No. I love being in the front of house. I'm a people's guy. I begrudgingly went to the kitchen. You have to understand.
Yeah.
Marco put me there because there was a bunch of guys that he didn't want his mom to be with alone. My passion is front of house. And I still do that. That I still enjoy. I'm still in the front of house. I'm still making jokes. I'm still running around the restaurant. I'm still clearing tables. That's my passion.
It's really nice to speak to someone who enjoys waking up in the morning because they're going to work. You strike me as one of those people.
Oh, bro. I love what I do, bro. I don't find work as work. I find work as fun. Literally, because I meet different people every day. I'm not sitting and looking at a wall or a laptop the whole day. I'm with people the whole day. I'm outside. I go to work in shorts now. So it's a great time.
Alex Kgosientsho, it's been great to talk to you again. Thank you very much indeed. The owner of Jameli Restaurants. Of course you want to listen to it again, and of course this will be podcast.